This day was eventful and incredibly tragic. For the 7-year-old girl, there was a thunderstorm outside, which made it even more terrifying. The Countess was bleeding heavily, the maids were fussing, the newborn baby was not breathing. A room filled with the smell of blood, deafening screams and bustling footsteps. The moment she saw her dying mother and her stillborn child, memories of her past life flooded into her vulnerable soul, incredibly timely. And the 7-year-old girl could not withstand this shock and lost consciousness, which alarmed the servants even more. And so began her new life, the life of Irene Tyrlin. 2 years later, the girl was riding in a carriage with her uncle, who asked if she was worried. "The Duchess is her mother's cousin, so she will certainly take care of her," said the uncle. "There is no decent life awaiting her in the ruined Count's house. Oh, if only her father had not squandered his fortune on wine and gambling." Yes, Irene was convinced that everything was going exactly as it was in the novel. On the day of her mother's death, she realized that this world was from a novel that she had read in a past life. An ordinary love story, a hero who is ready to do anything for the sake of his beloved, only she was reborn not as her, but as Irene. The same villainess who mocked the heroes in the Duke's estate and died mysteriously. She didn't live to adulthood, and Irene's life in the book was frighteningly similar to her previous one. Ruin, cold, and hunger, although now she had food at least once a day and she thought she could cope. But it turned out that there are things worse than hunger, and that is loneliness in these silent halls. She endured for 2 years until Count Turlin, her father, died in a gambling brawl. Later, an uncle appeared who decided to send her to the Duke's house. She knew everything in advance and was no longer surprised. Even knowing the future, the 7-year-old girl is unable to change anything, which is how she ended up in this crew. He was leading her to her death, although there should be warm food and a room in the duchy. Maybe everything is not so bad. No, enough of that empty hope. She's not the villain from the book if you're careful. Perhaps the Duchess will not be disappointed in her, and the future hero will not hate her. Perhaps if she keeps a low profile, then fate will change at least a little. When the carriage arrived at the estate, Duchess Leto Casaros came out to greet Vanessa's daughter. The little girl confirmed that it was she and looked at what the Duchess looked like. The woman narrowed her eyes and frowned, noticing the girl's red hair. Irene was alarmed by the Duchess's tone. Goosebumps ran across her skin. Was she really disgusted by this color? Looking at the small suitcase of Irene's things, the Duchess sighed and said that she had no children and needed guardianship. She will make sure that they do not want for anything, but on the condition that she will not cause trouble to the Casaros' house. The little girl agreed to these conditions and, bowing, thanked her ladyship. She reported that the maid took her to the room and asked the child to have a good rest. Irene was surprised. She turned out to be colder than she expected. The maid showed the lady into the room and asked her to call her if she needed anything. The room itself was luxurious. It was not just a guest room. The Duke's direct heirs must have lived here. Now Irene understood why that Irene had behaved so carelessly. A wealth-starved nominal aristocrat who suddenly finds herself in possession of all this wealth. Of course, she imagined herself to be the mistress of this house and did not even suspect that her antics would incur the Duchess's disfavor. The Duchess didn't seem to like the color of her hair. This meant that they had to be always laid out carefully and that no one from Casaros could be given any reason to be dissatisfied. If she was careful, at least they wouldn't hate her. But could such little things really change fate? Even knowing the plot of the book, she was still powerless to change anything. She could not avoid moving to the Duke's house. So now, by just slightly adjusting her behavior, she will be able to break the predetermined future. And is she sure that under any circumstances she will refrain from the stupid things that Irene did? But suddenly there was a knock on the door, and the young lady was called, reminding them of dinner time. She asked to be allowed to take her to the dining room, and the little girl stood up anxiously, saying that she was already on her way. The little girl was waiting at the table and stood up as soon as she saw the Duke and Duchess approaching. Having bowed before the Duke, the girl began to introduce herself as His Grace Irene. Duke Amphion Casaros interrupted her, noticing how thin she was for a 9-year-old child. Since they took her under their guardianship, she now became part of the Casaros family. She will receive the privileges of their house, but she must not forget her responsibilities. Irene thanked his lordship, and then the Duke suggested they begin dinner. As you would expect from a military leader who earned his title on the battlefield, he exudes authority so much that it's hard to breathe. Could she really find a common language with them? But that same day she came down with indigestion. But when the seasons changed and winter came, she gradually became accustomed to this quiet life. Contrary to initial fears, everything the Duchess gave her turned out to be incredibly luxurious. It was so soft, something she could not have dreamed of in her past life or this one. And soon the Duchess informed her stepdaughter that she would hire a tutor for her. Summer asked if she didn't like studying, and Irene replied with alarm that she simply didn't expect to be given such an opportunity. The Duchess explained that as a ward of the ducal house, she must receive a proper education and manners. Irene sheepishly said that she would do her best, and in her past life, she had been a mediocre student. The little girl looked with gratitude at her stepmother, who was calmly drinking tea. Irene thought that maybe if she showed good results, she would at least praise her a little. She was so carried away by this peaceful life that she completely forgot about the main thing and suddenly broke the cup. The personal maid, Lieta, quickly called out to the young lady and asked her to let her clean up. She shouldn't have done it herself. Irene apologized guiltily, saying that it was out of habit, thinking that she was used to doing everything herself. Soon Irene heard some noise outside the door. Men were running somewhere in a hurry, saying that they needed to warn the lady. They had a guest, but she hadn't heard that anyone was supposed to arrive, Irene thought, and looked out from the second floor. But suddenly, horrified, she froze when she saw the familiar image of a boy. His eyes were as golden as the Duke's, but with a more daring gleam. And at that moment she understood everything. In front of her stood Alan Casaros, the main character of the novel. The one who will lead the villain to death. The wheel of fate, albeit slowly, but inexorably, made its move. The boy was the illegitimate son of the Duke of Casaros, and it was with these lines that the novel began. His real mother was a commoner, but immediately after giving birth, she mysteriously disappeared along with Alan. And 7 years later, he returned alone to the Duke's house, and that day finally came. Approaching the boy from behind, the girl greeted the boy. Alan turned his gaze. As a result, 7-year-old Alan Casaros turned fully towards the girl. She introduced herself as Irene, a distant relative of the Duchess, and lived here under her care. According to the plot, this boy must kill her one day, so she is afraid to even talk to him. But if she is kind to him, perhaps fate will change at least a little. She hoped that he would not notice the fear in her voice, and pointing to the portrait behind her, said that it depicted his lordship, the head of this house. She said that he earned his title on the battlefield and raised the Casaros family. He is honored throughout the duchy. The boy mumbled, embarrassed and irritated, but who asked her? And Irene finished, "They say that he had been looking for it all these years, and she was sure that he would be happy to see her again." "Nonsense," Alan said coldly, and Irene shuddered in alarm, asking what. The boy, offended, explained that he was not looking for him, but for a replacement for himself, that is, an heir. "Or is he like a fool who believes in cheesy fairy tales about a loving father?" he asked. Irene thought with fear he was just a child. But he thought so cynically, what had he experienced? In the novel, Alan really couldn't stand even the mention of his mother. Now she understood why it was enough to just look at him for everything to become clear. Children who have experienced family violence always feel rejected by the world. She knew it as well as they did. Irene said that his lordship was a strict but fair man. If he needed an heir, the Duke could have had a child with his new wife or chosen someone from his relatives. However, his lordship did not give up, the girl said, and continued searching for all these 7 years. "So doesn't that mean," the girl began cheerfully, "that he was more than just the heir of the family?" Irene's words gave him hope. Suddenly, the door to the hall opened, and a man quickly approached the children, turning around. Having rounded Irene, he confidently approached his firstborn without even removing the cape from his shoulders. And without shaking off the snow, Irene realized that he was really in a hurry. It was good that the Duke was glad to find his son. But suddenly, Duke Amphion hovered over the boy and sternly asked what he was doing there. The surprise of both children knew no bounds, and Irene was even horrified by this outcome. The Duke tensely reminded him of his mother Natalie and anxiously asked where she was now. The boy remained silent because of the mention of his mother, saying that he didn't know, and put his hand in his pocket. And pulling out the necklace, he shouted sternly that she said that if he came here and showed it, he would listen to him. The Duchess approached her husband from behind and said that this was a necklace of harmony. "This is the very gift of his lordship to that woman. It seems the heirloom of the Casaros house has returned." Amphion looked at the necklace and, squeezing it in his fist, said, "First we need to make sure of its authenticity." And while he was asking to prepare a room for the boy, the Duchess sighed and asked why. "The child, the necklace, isn't it obvious?" the woman said as she approached the boy. "He has the same golden eyes as the Casaros family." Duchess Leto asked Pavel to escort the young gentleman to the best chambers on the 4th floor of the main wing. After hesitating, Amphion asked, not understanding, "Fourth, what about the room on the 3rd? "Ah, that room," replied the Duchess. I think she had already told him that she had given it to Irene. Apparently he didn't hear. It was a shame for such a room to be empty, so she put a girl there. Could it be, the little girl thought anxiously, that the Duchess had given her that very room? The one that the Duke kept for his son all this time. In the novel it was like that. By order of the Duke, the chambers were furnished with expensive furniture. They kept it in perfect order until the heir returned, which is why there was only a dressing table there. Is it appropriate for a young maiden and a young gentleman to live on the same floor? The fourth floor is more appropriate for Mr. Allen. There are spacious rooms there, not inferior to the third floor, the Duchess said while Irene was worried. But the Duke soon agreed that he would rely entirely on her judgment in matters of the children's placement. That's all, Irene thought anxiously and fearfully. She didn't want to disturb anyone, but her very presence became the cause of discord in the house. Alan called out to Irene and asked her if she really believed that the Duke was glad to see him. Irene wanted to explain, but then the boy interrupted her and asked if she had noticed too. The man didn't even ask his name as he walked away. The guy cursed and clenched his teeth. And then he exclaimed, "That's why he can't stand redheads." Irene shuddered. Alan looked back at her, and looked with particular anger and, it seemed, even pain and resentment. At that moment, Irene realized that when he looked at her hair, he saw her. Alan snorted and asked her to leave him alone. That same night, the girl had a crazy dream in which a man called her a pathetic nobody. And he angrily asked how an orphan without family or title dared to occupy the room prepared for the heir of the Casaro's house. "No," she explained, worried and stuttering. The Duchess herself ordered her to settle there. But suddenly a female voice cried out that she was an ungrateful bitch. The Duchess said that they had taken her in out of pity, and now she dared to reproach her. Holding back the trembling in her hands from fear of adults, Irene tried to say that she didn't want to. But suddenly a terrifying phrase about hating red hair was heard, and her heart sank. Alan approached closer, disappointed, but suddenly she noticed curls fluttering above his head. She looked back. This red-haired lady was behind her. Who is she? The girl thought worriedly. "Enough!" Alan screamed, grabbing her with his hands, asking her to just disappear from his life. He squeezed her throat in a maddened manner and told her to die, to perish. He shouted that it would be better if she didn't exist at all. Irene cried and asked for help. She had done nothing and didn't want to die. But suddenly Irene opened her eyes and came to her senses, awakening from sleep. She jumped out of bed with alarm and grabbed her throat, anxiously trying to catch her breath. And when she finally calmed down, she buried her face in her knees and hugged herself by the shoulders. This was not the first time she had this dream. Ever since Alan had appeared, nightmares had been visiting her more and more often, and silence reigned in the Duke's house. But it was like the calm before the storm, and that only made it more frightening. But suddenly Irene noticed Lita. She asked if she was carrying these books to her room and said that she would carry them herself. The maid, surprised, said that she shouldn't. They were quite heavy, and it would be better for her to carry them. But Irene insisted. "Nothing of the sort," she said. She could handle it and asked her not to worry. She snatched the books and Lita became worried, but Irene still said that she could handle it and thanked her for her concern. The girl still couldn't get used to the fact that she was being looked after. Lita was always busy anyway, but if she could handle something herself, she would do so. But suddenly, Irene saw Alan coming down from the floor in front of her. She looked at him in surprise, and Alan looked at her indifferently. Both children's hands were on the railing, but suddenly Alan raised his. Intimidated by her own thoughts, Irene thought he was going to push her. And imagining this, the girl stepped back and, tripping, dropped the books. Alan looked at the confused girl with incomprehension and froze for a moment, raising an eyebrow. Realizing what she had just done, Irene immediately apologized and explained that she had simply been lost in thought and the books had slipped out of her hands. Without answering, Alan only sighed heavily and, lost in thought, looked away. Irene was saying she hoped they weren't too hurt when she noticed Alan had walked past her. Pursing her lips, Irene waited for Alan to finally leave and, gathering her books, exhaled. Walking along the corridors, she realized that it was stupid, and the young gentleman was already looking at her with contempt. She sighed, thinking that now he would definitely decide that she was hopeless, but then she noticed something. "Alan, what? You decided to go out into the forest, and in such cold weather and without outerwear." The girl was worried that he might catch a cold, but suddenly she remembered his angry look. And she thought, although is it worth worrying if in response she only gets more barbs? Alan continued walking through the yard towards the forest, stopping. He exhaled, thinking about something. Suddenly a voice from behind him shouted that it would soon get dark and he had better return home. Looking back, he saw a red-haired girl standing below him, out of breath. His gaze immediately changed and Alan, stunned, asked what she was doing here. Irene explained that this was still the territory of the duchy, but if you didn't know the way, you could easily get lost. Alan explained indifferently and somewhat irritatedly that it was none of her business. After a pause, the girl said that she was simply worried about him. She thought sadly, no matter how much she tried to convince herself to pay attention. This bone-chilling cold and loneliness Irene recalled in the past years. She knew all too well what it was like to be alone at times like this. She said that he would freeze in such clothes, even though she had not had time to take anything warmer. The girl asked him not to pay attention, and if he wanted, to continue walking, and then suggested that they return together. Her words amused Alan, and he exhaled, grinned, and took a step towards the girl. He leaned over Irene and said with a threatening look, "Just look at her, how hard she's trying. She pretends to be so grown up and kind, she courts the whole mansion, even sucks up to the maids." "Does she enjoy feeling superior to everyone else by playing the benefactor?" Alan asked. "Damn, to be honest," he said with a grimace. Her fake expression just made him sick. After the boy had spoken, he turned away and walked away, and Irene hugged her cloak to herself. She really liked to smile at everyone, so his words made her feel terribly offended. Gathering her strength, the girl threw a snowball at Alan's head, causing him to ask what she was doing. Then Irene, looking at the boy with resentment, shouted, "You're right! She shouldn't have worried about him at all." However, the words she said resonated in Alan's soul, and his heart sank in his chest. "What?" the boy asked her, surprised and worried. She said with heaviness that she had no time to think about him at all. But even so, Irene approached Alan and carefully handed him the cape and told him to do what he wanted. She said indignantly that she was returning, and that she couldn't get sick or cause any inconvenience. Unlike him, she couldn't do as she pleased. Alan squeezed his cape. "You're kidding me!" he shouted, running up and grabbing Irene's hand. And in an irritated, demanding tone, he asked how they were so different. Irene reminded him that he was the heir to the ducal house and asked if that was not true. The heir, indignantly screaming, asked Alan, "What does this title give him? His father is not interested in it." The Duchess considers him a burden, and deep down she despises him just as much, doesn't she? He asked desperately. The girl asked without being involved. Why, if he was so sad he didn't leave? Alan exclaimed, but was unable to find the right words to explain the reason. Therefore, he snorted with displeasure and said that she didn't care and didn't understand, because she was born with a golden spoon in her mouth. Irene sighed heavily and admitted that this was the only thing she envied him. Alan frowned, and she explained that he could be rude, rebel, and generally do whatever he wanted, and they would still leave him in this house. And she had no other place to hide from the cold and hunger. Alan froze in horror, and Irene, leaving, said that that is why she has to serve, to please, just so that they don't throw her out. He's sick of her helpfulness and pretense, but it's the only way she can last another day. The next day, Lieta invited the young lady to dinner. As she walked to the dining room, Irene wondered what she was doing, because she had tried so hard to avoid conflicts with Alan, and now he must have completely hated her, she thought sadly. Could everything really go according to the novel's script, Irene thought, and sighed heavily. Alan, standing behind her, suddenly noticed how loudly she sighed, and when she looked back, he became embarrassed. Strangely, Alan, who had so far ignored all of the Duke's invitations, suddenly appeared in the dining room. Irene asked uncertainly if he had come to have dinner with them and why he was still standing. Alan sheepishly admitted that he didn't know where he could sit. Irene guessed that no one had seen him off and happily asked, so he came here himself. Thank the gods, Irene thought happily. It seemed he was no longer angry about yesterday and showed him his place. Sitting down opposite, she said that his lordship and his wife would soon arrive, and they would be glad to see him. And Alan sat down leisurely on the chair. He looked at Irene, but she looked away. It was awkward, and she was thinking about what she could talk about. But soon the doors to the dining room opened, and the Casaros couple entered the hall. Thank heavens, the adopted daughter thought with a sigh of relief. Here they are. Irene, entering the dining room, looked at Alan, who was sitting at the table, and he looked at her. But then the Duchess, frowning, said that this was Irene's place and asked who had given him permission to sit there. The boy stood there stunned, simply not knowing how to react. At the same time, the irritated Duchess tried to find out who had brought Mr. Allen into the dining room. But then, overcoming herself, Irene exclaimed, she said that it was she who gave up her place to him, citing the fact that Allen was the heir of this family. So she thought he should sit in that place. The boy pursed his lips in embarrassment. After a pause, the Duke cleared his throat and, sitting down, suggested that they begin the meal. The Duchess meekly accepted this and sat down in her rightful place. Irene breathed a sigh of relief. There really was no room for relaxation here, not even for a second. However, Alan was no less tense than Irene until the very end of dinner. Due to the constant tension during dinner, Irene's stomach began to hurt again, something she hadn't had for a long time. She was about to go to the kitchen for medicine when she suddenly ran into Alan on the way out. The girl asked him what he was doing there at such a late hour. Alan sheepishly admitted that he had gone to her room. To her, Irene asked again, why? Yes, just like that, looking away, Alan answered, saying that he wanted to discuss something with her. She assumed that he had come to talk to her about yesterday's conversation. Alan asked to listen to him, but suddenly muffled but frequent sounds were heard from the side. Stopping, Alan asked what the sounds were, and after assessing the situation, Irene realized that they were coming from the Duchess's bedroom. Unpleasant sounds for children's ears and a man's moan calling for the mistress. Irene quickly realized what was going on and what the source of these sounds was, so she covered Alan's ears. She hissed at him in alarm and told him that he didn't need to hear that. Alan asked what she was doing. Irene remembered very well that his lordship had left after dinner, so whose male voice was it? Alan asked her to leave too, expressing a desire to listen, and Irene kept wondering who was in the Duchess's bedroom now. Is the Duchess cheating? Although if you think about it, the Duke himself was the first to betray her, but still, it's just a disaster. Having broken free, Alan asked him to finally let go and asked what she was doing, and Irene asked him to be quieter. But suddenly, a question came from the Duchess's bedroom asking if there was anyone there, and the children looked around anxiously. Irene was worried about what she would do if the Duchess decided that she had been eavesdropping. I thought that she would definitely hate her and worried, trembled with fear. Alan noticed this and confidently intercepted his older sister's trembling hand. So he angrily ordered her to stop shaking like an aspen leaf, and then, calling her to go, he dragged her away from the Duchess's room. Following him, Irene continued to look detachedly at the back of the boy, confidently leading her. It was strange, the girl thought peacefully. Just yesterday she was afraid to even approach him. And now, next to him, she felt much calmer, but suddenly the couple stopped. Before them, at such a late hour, stood Duke Casaros, who had returned from business. Irene froze and wondered in horror what the Duke was doing here. She thought she must not show it, and asked if his lordship had returned yet. The man, confirming, said that the business had finished earlier, and asked what the two of them were doing in the corridor at such an hour. Worried, the little girl said she had a nightmare and was afraid to be alone. And Alan consoled her. The boy shuddered and looked at his sister, and then turned his gaze to his father. This, said the Duke, was how to show concern for one's sister, and he said that Alan was a good fellow. He behaved like a true representative of the Casaros family, and the praise embarrassed the boy. And Irene was pleasantly surprised that this gloomy Duke praised Alan. Squeezing his hand, she even dared to suggest that this incident could bring them closer together. Now the Duke asked the children to return to their rooms, saying that he needed to go to Summer. Oh no, the girl thought anxiously, this cannot be allowed. If he goes to the Duchess now, he will find her with her lover. Their already fragile union will collapse, and she, as a relative of the Duchess, will be thrown out of the house without hesitation. She simply couldn't allow this to happen, so she rushed to his lordship and tugged at his sleeve. Amphion looked in surprise at the embarrassed girl who was mumbling something and trying to convey something. Irene thought she was an idiot. What was she even doing, and how could she stop him? And all she could awkwardly say was that she was still afraid to go back into the room. The man immediately turned to Pavel and asked him to bring 3 cups of warm tea with milk into the living room. He reported that the warm drink calms the mind. And he also said that he would stay with them until they could return to bed. The butler had already invited them to come in. Both children froze in surprise and then thought with embarrassment that perhaps the Duke was much kinder than they thought. As the children and their father headed into the living room, the Duchess came out of her room. But the next day, the Duchess ordered that she be called early in the morning. Irene was worried that she had suspected something the night before and did not dare to enter. Trying to calm down, the girl took a breath and knocked on the door to say that she had arrived. With permission, Irene entered cautiously and noticed the Duchess standing modestly by the window. Bowing to her mother, she asked if she wanted to see her. And Duchess Leto immediately started talking about yesterday, which greatly frightened her stepdaughter. Summer said she probably thought she was doing her a favor, but her intervention was unnecessary. Irene, clutching the skirt of her dress in alarm, told her ladyship that she did not understand her. The woman squinted and asked what she thought she had done last night. But seeing the little girl's reaction, I immediately concluded what a smart girl she was. Summer admitted that she knew she was sensible beyond her years, but not to this extent. Having looked her over, the Duchess explained that their debt had long been looking for one person, and her name was Natalie. Natalie, Irene thought in surprise, but what does this have to do with it? The Duchess continued, she had been hiding all this time, and now she suddenly decided to send only her son. She was sure that she had a hidden agenda, and as a Duchess, she did not dare to take it lightly. And she explained that the man in her bedroom was hired to find Alan's mother. Irene could not hide her surprise that the Duchess was looking for Alan's mother. Recently, a red-haired woman was spotted near the duchy, whose description matches the wanted woman, but as soon as they started pursuing her, she simply disappeared, not the most beautiful reports. It was not for this reason that she allowed him to enter her chambers in the middle of the night, and she was already thinking of handing over the matter to others. Suddenly, the mercenary exclaimed, asking the Duchess to wait. It seemed that someone was hiding her. Covering, she asked then, but who and why? That's what she wanted, but suddenly she heard children's voices outside the door. Therefore, with a heavy sigh, she suggested to her mercenary that they discuss this issue another time. Now Irene realized that she had misunderstood everything she had heard and felt ashamed. Then Leto asked her if she really thought that she, the Duchess of Casaros, was capable of tarnishing the honor of the family. No, of course not, she said worriedly, and thought what an idiot, a fool she was. How could she even think such a thing? However, no matter what Irene thought, the Duchess was not angry with her, and on the contrary, noticed that she was not at all like her naive mother. And perhaps she decided that she would hire additional mentors for her, which surprised Irene. Leto opened the curtains and said that she would be studying the management of the duchy's affairs as her assistant. Irene was daunted by the thought of helping to run the duchy from head to toe. As a result, both children were also taught to dance, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, the teacher repeated. A little closer, slowly, yes, just like that, magnificently, the children did everything that was required of them. But suddenly, Irene wondered why the Duchess was so persistently looking for Alan's mother. In the original story, Natalie barely appeared, and only when Alan grew up did she make her presence known. Madame asked Lady Turlin to concentrate. Irene apologized, but immediately stood on Alan's foot. Soon they took a break, and when the teacher left, Alan asked if she had slept well last night. Irene confirmed this and thought that she had been tormented by a bad feeling all night. And suddenly remembering last night she asked if he wanted to say something yesterday, Ala became embarrassed. He wanted to talk about her place at the table. Irene asked if he was worried about the lady, and she asked him not to dwell on it too much, but Alan said that that was not the issue, and Irene backed off. Then what's the matter? She asked the boy, and he explained that he didn't care about his status, and her sacrifice is of no use. But Irene, smiling, told Alan that both that place at the table and her room were on the 3rd floor. Initially, all this was intended for him because he is the heir of the Casaros family. Let her become the heir, he said, and Irene, alarmed, said that she could not. What's the problem, he asked, not understanding she's smart, but she doesn't have the blood of a commoner in her veins. And besides, he didn't want her future to be ruined because of his position. So, really, he was worried about her. The realization of this touched the little girl very much. She couldn't contain her emotions and burst into tears, and Alan asked worriedly why she was crying. And then, Irene said happily, he just said it so seriously, it was completely unlike himself. Irene told Alan that a ducal title was not something that could be earned through diligence or application. It is a great responsibility, but also a great power. One day he will want something so much that the title will become the key to the goal. The teacher then returned and, supporting Irene, asked Alana not to give up the title so rashly. Now she suggested returning to the lesson and asked the children to stand opposite each other as before. Not long ago he hated her, and now their relationship has changed. Perhaps she has managed to change the plot. So 2 more years passed in a peaceful pace. Alan Casaros was already 9 and Irene Turlin 11. The girl asked Alan if he had forgotten that Baron Bonnet's family would be visiting them after dinner. What difference did it make whether they came or not, Alan said, and Irene asked if he understood that as the heir, it was his duty to greet them properly. Especially if the visit comes from a vassal house, the girl explained, and the boy considered it a hassle. These families will be his support when he inherits the ducal title. The Baron's son will arrive with them, and it would be good to make friends with him. The son of Baron Bonnet, Ethan, who arrived, praised the majestic mansion, a true home of such a noble family. What a tone, the children thought, and his peer gasped and said that she too was amazed when she first came here. Ethan moved around the young duke and approached Lady Turlin, telling her what he had been told about her. And bowing, he said that she was as refined as befits the daughter of a count's house. Irene smiled anxiously, wondering what he was hinting at, but thanked him as was proper. But suddenly Ethan, kissing her wrist, asked if she would do him the honor of being alone so they could get to know each other better. Irene was embarrassed by this action on the part of the guy and the extraordinary proposal. Unable to stand this, Alan angrily asked the Baron's son what he was allowing himself to do, the impudent fellow. Impudent, Ethan asked him, stunned. Did he just call him impudent? What else could he be called, Alan wanted to ask, but suddenly he saw Irene. Standing behind the Baron, the girl asked him not to do this. After assessing the situation, how Irene was pleading with him, and how Ethan was shaking with anger, Alan gave in. "You're so funny," Alan said before leaving the room Irene called her brother. But he, not listening to anyone, irritably went out. Ethan shouted after him, asking if he dared to run. Irene awkwardly changed the subject, offering to have some tea and asked if he would like hot chocolate. Sitting down on the sofa, the Baron's son said that he was not a child, and therefore asked to pour him some regular tea. While pouring tea, Irene thought with disappointment that she had asked him to befriend the Baron's son. However, Ethan said, this heir has a certain temperament. His mother told him to be patient, otherwise he would have stopped restraining himself long ago. She ordered, stopped, and asked Irene what exactly. Ignore any rudeness on his part, Ethan answered proudly. Still, at this point the Baron's son cleared his throat and said, it is not known who's degenerate. It must be hard for her, Lady Turlin, to nurse this brat, he supposed. They say that his mother also did many things, a commoner daring to settle in the Duke's house. Irene turned to Monsieur Bonnet and explained that Monsieur Alain was the only heir recognized by his lordship. Therefore she warned the young man and told him to be prudent and watch his words. Hearing Irene's revelation and defense, Alan froze. Then the Baron's son awkwardly admitted that he felt that she would understand him and became nervous. However, she will soon marry one of the vassals, most likely him, Irene asked worriedly. Why did he think so? And Mr. Bonnet explained that she was an orphan, had no close relatives left, and her fate depended on the will of the Duke and Duchess. Therefore, the best solution is to choose a spouse for her from families close to the court, and given her background, Lady Turlin, their family was the most sensible choice. Suddenly, the door to the hall opened with a bang and something in both of their chests tightened. Irene looked around anxiously and called out to Alan, asking him to stop. But Alan could no longer be stopped. He ran up to the Baron's son and swung with all his anger. After this incident, both families met each other. The Baron shouted angrily, even if he has a hot temper, this is not a reason for assault. Duke Amphion asked Alan to explain himself with displeasure, but the son remained silent. Then, frowning, the Duke repeated himself and asked Alan Casaros if he had heard him. But suddenly, Irene stepped forward and, shielding her brother, said that everything happened because he stood up for her. The adults became wary, and the Duke stood up for them. The Duchess frowned and asked what it was all about. Irene explained to the adults that Mr. Bonnet had declared that since she was an orphan, the ducal house itself would find a suitable groom for her, and he made it clear that she would be married to him. And then Alan became furious. Although, when they insulted him, he didn't even utter a word. The father asked what exactly the insults were, and Irene, without a drop of embarrassment or pity, stated that she called him an unknown degenerate. And the offspring, the entire family of the Baron, was horrified. The man immediately asked what the outrage was and ordered his son to immediately apologize to the young master and lady. After this incident, the Bonnet family hastily left the ducal residence. But the Duchess was indignant that the fact that their family served their house did not give them the right to treat members of the ducal family like servants. She never told them that they had to endure such attacks in silence, but they had to tell her the whole truth at once. His lordship was also angry, and the House of Bonnet would pay for its insolence, Irene's mother solicitously informed her. She did not know why the Duchess stood up for her so zealously, but Alan, who used force against the Baron's son. Irene quietly crept into his room and knocked on the door. Alan came out, asking who was there. Irene worriedly asked him to be quieter and let her in faster before they were noticed. She thought that Alan was hungry and asked him to at least chew. She persuaded Lita to help her cook it secretly. It's good that the Duke didn't find out. And the Duchess allowed her not to go to dinner as punishment. After listening to her, Alan asked if she was angry after what he had said. Well, Irene admitted, it was even ridiculous and cute. What? He asked irritably. Did she just call him cute, but not in the way he thought? Irene explained that they are sweet in their simplicity, like an open book. Adult aristocrats are much worse. They whisper behind your back, spread dirty rumors, disgusting cowards, Alan finished. But then the girl removed the crumb from the corner of his mouth. And still, she happily thanked him for standing up for her today. It was very thoughtful of him. Such praise made Alan's heart beat faster, and the boy pursed his lips in embarrassment. Alan blushed even more, and this did not escape Irene's notice. The girl asked what was wrong with him. She said his cheeks were very red, and she was worried that he had a fever. She asked me not to move so that she could check, but then the blood rushed to her head. And he jumped up embarrassedly and asked her to leave him alone, and Irene, frightened, asked what he was doing. He waved her off in embarrassment and exclaimed that he was sleepy, ordering her to go to her room. And indeed, looking at her watch, Irene realized that it was already late, and she said that she would go. Before leaving, she reminded him that he had classes tomorrow and told him not to even think about skipping classes. It would be better to get some sleep than to waste time on this nonsense, as Alan usually replied cheekily, "Well, here we go again. Does he really intend to continue to get into a fight and be punished for the slightest offense?" She said that it was time for him to realize his situation and come to terms with it. "So if he goes to lessons, she won't marry this baron?" he asked tightly. And then he confidently repeated that he was asking if she would really marry him if ordered. Irene hesitated and said she didn't know. However, it was not she who decided this, but the Duke and Duchess. Alan indignantly asked why they should decide for her. Irene shrugged and explained that it was because she was under the care of the Casaros and was obliged to obey those who had taken it upon themselves to look after her. At the moment, they are in charge of the Casaros house, which means that if they decided that she should become part of the Baron's family, then she would have to marry him. One day, Natalie showed Alan that this ducal house was the place where he was born. The first impression of the Casaros estate is that it is so large that it is hard to believe that ordinary people live there. But the next moment, his mother grabbed his hand and asked him to take it, putting the necklace into his hand. The woman asked her son to show this to those who lived in this house, and they would understand who he was. And then, step by step, take back what is rightfully his. She will return when the time comes. And then they will begin to take revenge on those who tried to use her, Natalie said madly. And she asked if Lion would do this for his poor and unhappy mother. Poor and unhappy, Alan thought. But isn't she trying to use him? He had thought before that if he were driven out of the duchy, it would be at least a small consolation to see her angry. But now he doesn't care, because he has something important. And while she's here, he wants to become a duke. But he will not allow anyone to take away from him what is dear to his heart. So he came to Irene early in the morning. And calling his sister by name, he said that he needed to talk to her. At that time, the girl was just getting ready. And seeing her, Alan froze in shock and embarrassment. Irene awkwardly dropped her comb and, asking him to wait, asked why he hadn't knocked. She was already getting ready for bed and had let her hair down, and now because of him she would have to do it all over again. That red curly hair, just like the woman he hated. Alan had long wondered why she always wore her hair up, and if it was because he said he hated the color red. That's what he told her the first time they met, but does she remember? He really did treat her coldly in the past. But not now. Now Alan said that in his presence she doesn't have to remove them. Irene turned around in surprise. The guy said that he didn't mind his hair color. Irene doubted it, because that's when he said it. Alan interrupted and explained that he couldn't stand other redheads because they reminded him of the one who gave birth to him. And touching her strand of hair, he said that she was not her. Her hair is beautiful. True, Irene asked, embarrassed and awkward, and pulled back a strand of her hair. But she didn't understand why he came at all, because he seemed to be going to bed. Alan stood up and explained that he wanted to say that he would now take his studies seriously. True, the girl asked. She was very happy about this. Finally, he understood how important it was. Yeah, Alan confirmed. Just like she said, he needs to realize his situation. And he found something here that he wants to protect at any cost. No one will ever be able to take her away from him. How much strength he gave to prevent them from taking her away against her will. And suddenly she was going to leave him, but why? From that very day, Alan really began to study much more diligently, and now 3 years have passed as if in a moment. Not long ago, she turned 14. There was a pleasant breeze outside that made her want to walk. The maid said that today's geography lesson was canceled. Her teacher had urgent matters. But still, the lady is simply incredible in some noble families. Girls don't even touch geography books. True, Irene thought sheepishly. If trouble happened, knowledge would help her survive. All these years, she was given the same knowledge as her direct heirs. The Duchess personally taught her everything a noble lady should know, but this idyll is not eternal for the plot. In the original, Irene didn't even live to adulthood. Now she and Alan are close, but if she wants to survive, she will have to leave this place. Perhaps the Duchess would not let her marry, because she was so useful and smart, Irene doubted. "Why does she think so?" asked the servant. "In some families it is the women who inherit the line." Clutching the handle of her umbrella, Irene turned to Lita and reminded her that Casaros already had a legitimate heir. "But she was just a freeloader. That would never happen," Lita said worriedly, that was not what she meant. And Irene understood this and asked her to be careful. If she had to leave, she would remain to serve the Duchess. And such words could harm her. Alan heard this dialogue, and so he asked his sister why on earth she was planning to leave at all. The boy came out of his class, so he was still sweaty. He was already 12 this year. Seeing her brother, Irene happily asked if he had finished his fencing lessons yet. Alan shouted indignantly, ordering her not to avoid answering. And attacking his sister, he anxiously asked if she was really going to leave this house. Realizing that a serious conversation was coming, Irene asked Lita to step forward. Afterwards, Irene said that she should work on controlling her emotions. It was not proper for a future duke to flare up like that. But Alan didn't give up trying to find out if the Duchess had told her to get out of there. "Oh God," she said with a heavy sigh. "Here's someone who needs to learn to choose his words carefully." Irene explained that in a few months, she was to make her debut in high society. She could not rely on the goodwill of the Duke all her life. She had to prepare for an independent life. It turns out, squeezing her wrist, Alan asked, "She is already preparing to leave." "Yes," she answered, smiling awkwardly. "She is only a guest in this house, and sooner or later she will have to leave." He froze for a moment, but having collected his thoughts, he decided to continue the dialogue. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by the guys looking for Alan. One of them said something about time after training, and Irene wondered, puzzled, who it was. Suddenly, the main chatterbox turned his attention to the girl next to him, but Alan's reaction puzzled him. As if he understood everything, the boy cleared his throat. Addressing Lady Turlin, he asked to be allowed to introduce himself. His name was David. He and Alan practiced fencing. Irene reacted positively, immediately realizing that the boy was from the Bowen house, the son of one of the vassals. And then he asked, embarrassed, if she was Alan's sister now. He understood why he never talked about her. If he had such a beautiful sister, he would also hide her from everyone. Irene thought it was cute. They would have continued their pleasant conversation, but suddenly Alan coldly asked, "Sister?" A shiver ran down everyone's spines, and David asked Alan, worriedly trying to smooth things over, what was wrong. Ignoring his comrades around him, he asked why she didn't correct him, and he reminded her that she was just a guest in this house, and something in Irene's chest squeezed painfully. A sensible friend shouted at him and told him to at least think about what he was saying. Those very words that she herself repeated to him more than once, for some reason now they cut so painfully. Holding back, Irene forced a smile and said that after all, she was older, so she was like a sister to him, even if they were not related by blood. "Hey!" Realizing his mistake, the guy called out to Irene. But the girl didn't even intend to listen to him and simply said that she had to go. She told Alan's friends who came that she was glad to meet them, but she didn't even turn around. And indeed, if she had stayed there for even a second, she would not have been able to hold back her tears. All Alan could do was shout after Irene, "Wait!" Walking away quickly, Irene told herself, "Don't cry, you can't cry. Alan just told the truth, that's all." But still, the boy did not stand and ran up to her asking her to stop. She stopped with a start but did not turn around immediately. Only after she had brought her thoughts and herself into order did she again put on a smile and ask what was wrong. Why her? He wanted to ask, but Irene got ahead of him and apologized, saying that it was rude of her. She promised to take care in future not to disgrace the name of the house, but Alan exclaimed, "That is not the point." And with a heavy sigh, he asked if she really believed the nonsense he had said. He simply repeated her own words, and she acted like a fool. He repeated her words, seriously. He was making fun of her like that. Alan knew she always read faces, but she didn't notice that it was just a joke. And, as if nothing had happened, he asked her not to take everything so seriously. The joke, turning into a shout, asked Irene not to take it to heart. And unable to restrain himself, he said that she was trying her best to be recognized and that he shouldn't dare take this lightly. In desperate terror, she screamed that she was tired of being afraid of being hated. Alan froze in shock. He thought about stopping her, but he couldn't find the words. And Irene kept screaming heartbreakingly, "Stop treating her like that. If only he considered her family." If he had called her sister, a chill would have gone through Alan's body. The storm that had started during the argument was gaining momentum. Alan asked worriedly where she was going. "What difference does it make to him?" she shouted and ordered him not to dare follow her. With these words, Irene ran away, leaving her umbrella and Alan behind. The rain was getting heavier, and the girl had already run far into the forest. It seemed like everything she had been storing up inside had finally burst out all her life. She had been doing nothing but trying to be worthy of love. But to take it out on Alan, even if he has grown taller, he is still that 12-year-old boy. Perhaps she really did get carried away. And his face, when he tried to stop her, he looked so confused. Soaking wet, Irene thought she needed to go back and apologize, but first it was necessary to find the way back. A friend heard a clap of thunder, and lightning struck very close. Irene screamed in fear. I couldn't keep my balance while standing on the mud and my head was about to fall. But suddenly she felt someone's warm body on her back and hands catching her as she fell. Alan, who barely made it in time, asked her not to be afraid. He was nearby. She recognized this boy, Alan, by his voice, but did he go looking for her? Irene carefully asked why he was alone, and Alan said that the guards were also looking for her, but on the other side of the forest. Not understanding, Irene asked worriedly, but why did he go with them? He could have entrusted this matter to others. Alan also held back his emotions at that moment, but said that for him, the word family had never meant anything good. The woman who gave birth to him abandoned him. The Duchess hated him for the fact that the eternally cold and distant Duke was born. Letting tears out and pouring out his soul, he admitted that he hated his family, and he didn't want her, his sister, to become the same kind of family for him. But that didn't mean he considered her a stranger, so now he asked her not to leave him. Alan, even being a stubborn person, so sincerely confessed his feelings and weaknesses. Irene called Alan and pressed herself against his body. She thanked him for calling her sister and promised that she would always be by his side. With the end of their disagreement, the rain also ended. Soon the young master and mistress were discovered by guards. And so, after reconciliation, under the summer rain, the guards escorted them back to the ducal residence. And as it turned out, her sudden escape caused quite a stir. Holding hands, the children, wrapped in towels, appeared before their parents. And hearing the tone of the Duchess Irene, she thought with alarm that they were definitely angry. Instead of his wife, the Duke was the first to speak. He asked Irene Tirlon what had prompted her to such a reckless escape. Irene hesitated. They were probably disappointed in her, so what should she answer them? However, the brother noticed how his sister was having a hard time answering and was overcome by fear. That's why he said that it was his fault that she left. He dared to call his sister an ordinary guest in their house. Irene asked Alan to stop and exclaimed, "It's not true, he was just stating a fact." And for the parents, Irene's words came as a huge shock. Their hearts seemed to be pierced at once. And after thinking, the Duke said that, whatever the reasons, leaving the residence without permission was unacceptable. Half of the guard was combing the forest in the pouring rain. Moreover, they made the family worry. He thought they should seriously think about their behavior. Irene thought in surprise, he just called them family. The responsibility for her upbringing lies with the Duchess, Amphion concluded, and it was she who would determine their punishment. Summer seemed to look coldly at the children. After a pause, the Duchess said that they would both be under house arrest for a week. And now, at these words, Irene cringed. But contrary to her anxious expectations, Summer said they would take a hot bath and drink warm soup before bed. The last thing she needed was for them to catch a cold. Her heart instantly felt warmer. She expected a much more severe punishment. Lita invited the lady to come into the room. Dark thoughts came into her head again. Maybe they were so disappointed that they didn't even see the point in scolding her. But suddenly Alan ran up to her and squeezed her hand. He asked his sister not to think about anything there, but just to take a warm bath and rest. Smiling happily at Alan, she thanked him for everything and asked him to go to bed as soon as she warmed up. The boy didn't answer. He just let go of Irene's hand and watched her go. And finally, he said with embarrassment that his sister should also warm up and lie down. Warming herself by the fireplace after a warm bath, Irene diligently combed her curly hair. Suddenly, there were several knocks on the door, thinking that it was Lita Irene asking her to come in. But it was not a maid who entered the room. Seeing her grace, Irene immediately jumped up from her seat in alarm, dropping the poof with a crash. Duchess Leto asked why she was so scared. She modestly and awkwardly cowered and apologized, citing the fact that she had not expected it to be her who knocked. And Irene herself thought anxiously, she knew it, she was still angry with her. But suddenly something clicked in her head, and looking in the mirror, she realized that she had let her hair down. She immediately apologized to her ladyship and said that she would immediately remove them and braid them as usual. And then Summer finally decided to find out why she was always so scared around her. I asked if she had really given anyone any reason to fear her, and Irene froze in confusion. But having gathered her strength, she replied that she simply did not want her to hate her, even if it doesn't live up to her expectations. She didn't want her mistress to regret taking her under her wing. Irene thought she knew that these words would only make her angrier, but for some reason she couldn't keep quiet. But then Leto said that she had never had children and had never raised anyone before meeting her. Perhaps due to ignorance and uncertainty, she unwittingly made her worry. But excessive modesty can also be harmful. But who said that she doesn't like it? Mother said that loose hair suits her. She asked her daughter to stop changing herself for her. These words touched Irene to the depths of her soul. These were the words she had been missing all this time. Summer asked her not to cry because she had already been caught in a heavy downpour, and if she caught a cold, trouble would be inevitable. Her hand, touching Irene's cheek for the first time, felt so warm. Something had changed in her since that summer day. She no longer hid her hair by braiding it tightly, and Alan now openly cared about her and didn't give a damn about conventions. When he suggested that she try something, the Duchess thoughtfully told her that she should not eat fatty foods. She will also feel heavy from the fish and will not be able to fall asleep. Fish with vegetables will be easier to digest. Her father intervened in their conversation and said that if she ate everything they offered her, she would collapse from stomach pain. And at that very moment, Irene laughed loudly and cheerfully at the family's absurd argument. Why didn't she understand before that they wouldn't scold her or drive her away? Even if she laughs out loud, everything will be fine because the ducal house has long accepted her. And not as a villain, but as a family member, and she still couldn't believe it. Since then, she learned to be sincere, laughed when she was happy, and cried out in surprise. She would pout and lock herself in her room when she got angry. 3 years had already passed at this pace. It seemed, Lady Reuven said, that most of the young nobles from the south had already gathered. Irene agreed with her. Once every 3 years, the Duchy of Casaros holds a tournament to recruit into the knightly order. Their order is famous for its elite warriors, so at this time the sons of knightly families and noble families come here. By the way, Alan also disappeared, probably preparing for the tournament. She hadn't seen him for several days. Suddenly the lady asked Irene, since she was 17, maybe she had some men in mind. But Irene hadn't thought about that, and Reuven asked if she really planned to get engaged to someone of the Duchess's choice without even falling in love. Another girl asked Lady Reuven not to talk, as if they were all just dreaming about romance. Reuven was indignant, accidentally confusing Helen's surname, saying that the ducal house had organized this pretext for dating. The tournament really did become a place for social acquaintances. The Duchess specially invited girls, so that they would have a chance to find a groom. Reuben begged Helen to stop, saying that it wouldn't hurt her to get some attention herself. The boy awkwardly turned to the beautiful red-haired lady and asked if she was Lady Turlon, a relative of the Duchess. True, Irene answered, it was she, but she sincerely did not understand who he was. The guy immediately apologized, admitted that she was so charming that he was at a loss, and introduced himself as Pierre Servin. The Count's House of Servin, Irene thought in surprise when she learned the young man's last name. Pierre admitted that he had long wanted to approach her, and if she allowed it, he wanted to offer something. But suddenly someone called out to Sir Pierre and the young man, and Irene looked back. Alan said that the tournament participants had just been called to line up, and if he didn't hurry up, he would be disqualified. Irene stood up from her seat and called out to Alan in surprise. While Alan asked what he was hanging around here for and told Pierrot not to keep the commander waiting, Pierre gasped awkwardly and, apologizing, said that he hadn't noticed it and said that he was already running. "What kind of a flighty idiot is this?" he asked, and Irene awkwardly asked him to watch his language. Alan said that he actually cares about his sister, but what's more important, today they will have dinner together for the first time in a long time. They haven't chatted like this at the table for a long time. True, she answered joyfully and impatiently. Alan then went off to join the other participants, and the girls said their goodbyes with enthusiasm. But Irene became sad when she said the name Pierrot Servin. The Duchess later told her daughter that it seemed that the third son of Count Servin was seriously interested in her. As always, the Duchess is in the know, Irene thought, and told her ladyship that it looked like it. He is not an heir, but his family is noble, and even if he does not become a knight, his future is secure. They say he has a gentle character. His daughter agreed with this. He seemed kind. That is, he interested her, asked Duchess Leto. Her daughter asked what she was talking about. And then the woman asked more clearly if she was thinking of giving him a chance, which Irene asked, stunned. Summer asked not to be afraid. She was not talking about an engagement, but about the opportunity to get to know each other better. Irene thought, really, why not? Lady Bowen, Pierre Servin, names from the novel gradually begin to appear. This means that the main character will appear soon, even if she survived contrary to the plot. But Alan, just like in the book, falls in love with her at first sight. And then she will be left alone again, Irene thought seriously. And, having weighed all the pros and cons, I still decided to meet him again. And so, a few days later, the time came for the meeting. The servant told the lady that she would wait for her here. And soon Irene noticed Sir Servan. Pierre greeted Lady Turlin with enthusiasm, but Irene was wary because behind him she saw Alan, dissatisfied with what he was doing here. The girl asked her brother, and he replied that he had heard that he and Sir Servan were going for the sword. And he understands swords much better than she does, but it is impolite to show up without an invitation. Then Alan asked Sir Servan if he was against his company, which he asked anxiously. But immediately smoothing over the rough edges, he stuttered, saying, "Of course not. It was an honor for him." And looking at his half-brother and sister, he suggested going together, asking Lady Turlin if she was against it. The guys walked forward, chatting happily, and remaining a little behind, she tensed up. Looking at the satisfied Alan walking ahead, I wondered what he had planned. They left the store quite quickly, and the seller thanked them for their purchase. Pierre said contentedly that thanks to them he had chosen an excellent blade. "That's exactly why he was here," Alan replied, carefree but proud. Then the guy looked at the girl with embarrassment and asked how he could thank them. "No need," Irene replied sweetly, and asked him to simply show a decent result at the tournament. Pierre was pleasantly surprised and embarrassed by the lady's words. And then he asked Irene if he could present her with a laurel wreath if he won. "What?" she asked in surprise, thinking about the meaning of such a gesture after all. Giving a laurel wreath to a woman after a tournament is tantamount to a public proposal. The guy's proposal made not only Irene nervous, but also her younger brother. At that very moment, Alan coldly and angrily asked the guy what he had just said. To scare everyone, he ordered Pierrot to watch his language or else, but then Irene pulled him away. And leaning him against herself, she apologized and offered to discuss it if he won the wreath. Irene's whole appearance showed Alan that it was better not to do this. If he hits Pierre now, the punishment will be much more serious than just skipping dinner. But suddenly Lady Turlin called out to Lady Bowen, and Irene asked what she was doing there. The girl replied that their trading house was not far from here, and she was just on her way home. By the way, a girl noticed here that it seems he is already in close contact with Sir Servan. Really, the lady who had arrived babbled joyfully, and Alan strained his gaze with displeasure. He quickly came up with a solution to the problem and called out to Lady Bowen, saying that she was just in time. Sir Servan was heading in the same direction and suggested that the boys go together. Why? Irene thought without understanding, and Lady Bowen was embarrassed that she had to travel with Sir Servan. No, Pierre answered awkwardly and worriedly. He had to accompany Lady Turlin home. But Alan asked him not to worry, and, approaching his sister, he grinned and pulled her towards him. And he told the young man that he and his sister would return home together. What nonsense, Irene thought tensely. It would be better to leave quickly before he made a scene and laughed awkwardly. And having said that they were probably living in the same house, she wondered why he had grabbed her hand. She tried to remove her hand, but it had the opposite effect. And then he raised their hands higher and suggested that his sister go, and that was the end of it. Already riding in the carriage towards the house, Irene asked Alan what it was. "What is she talking about?" he asked carelessly, pretending that he had done nothing. Tensing up, Irene reminded her brother that he had been secretly following her and had ruined their meeting. "Spoiled?" Alan asked. "He wanted to buy a sword. He helped him and did nothing bad." "Yes, you," exclaiming, wanted to object to Irene, but suddenly exhaling, she said, "Okay, it doesn't matter." Tilting his head to the side, Alan asked hesitantly if she was angry, and after guessing, he asked if it was because he came to the meeting. After a pause, Irene answered sheepishly, "No, not really." Then Alan excitedly asked if not, could he sit next to her? That look of his, the girl thought, he knew that she couldn't be angry. She told him to do what he wanted, and Alan immediately sat down next to her, pressing himself tenderly. He was truly sorry, so he asked her not to frown so much, and Irene asked him to be more restrained next time. From the day she heard his sincere words, she simply could not be cold towards him. In front of strangers, he is unapproachable and silent, but for some reason he becomes very tender with her. She'll give him a break because he's still a child, but next time she'll definitely get him. But suddenly Alan turned to his sister, and he asked her to tell him if she really liked Pierre Servan. "No, that's not it," Irene answered cautiously. Then why did she pull her hand away as soon as he barely touched her? He asked and touched her finger with his finger. Or maybe she was afraid that he would misunderstand, as if he was asking in a pressuring manner. What a feeling, Irene thought cautiously and anxiously. There was a sense of déjà vu in its innocent tone. In the original story, Alan was the epitome of goodness. But now he is so cautious, and there is still so much pain in his eyes. Will he become that kind young man from the novel when he grows up? Laughing nervously, she awkwardly asked if he would misunderstand what he was talking about. She justified herself by saying that she was simply confused because he grabbed her hand so suddenly that it seemed strange to her. But then Alan reminded him that he was still a child, and there was nothing reprehensible in his behavior. Formally, yes, but still an unpleasant feeling remained on a subconscious level. So several days passed in vague uneasiness, and in the meantime, the festive evening in honor of the fencing tournament organized by the ducal house was approaching. Alan, who had changed his clothes, asked if she was ready, and recovering, he said that today he would accompany her. But there was no chance to finish speaking. Irene arrived and had just finished. His heart beat faster from the beauty he saw, and his breath caught in his throat. Embarrassed by her brother's reaction, Irene sheepishly adjusted her hair and asked what was wrong. She looked strange. "No," Alan answered happily. The dress suited her. "True," Irene asked happily and thanked her brother, saying that he also looked great. But that Alan admitted that he didn't understand the point of dressing up like that, since he wasn't even allowed to participate in the tournament. According to the rules of the fencing tournament, one can participate from the age of 16, so the Duke refused 15-year-old Alan. Irene asked her brother not to be upset because he would take part in the next tournament. "It will pass in 3 years, too long to wait." "Long?" Irene asked again. What did he mean by that? He explained that in order to inherit the title of Duke as soon as possible, he must show that he is capable of leading knights. If you wait for the appointed time, who knows when it will happen, but the sister did not understand why there was such a rush. His lordship is still full of strength, so there is no hurry, but then Alan said that he is doing this for her sake. "What?" Irene asked, not understanding, looking into Alana's eyes. "After all, the head of the house decides everything that concerns her," Alan asked, but the girl did not understand what he was getting at. And then Alan asked if he became a duke earlier, he could make her life easier, couldn't he? Irene felt goosebumps run across her skin, and for a moment his face seemed very creepy to her, but she didn't show it. And Alan continued to confidently say that there would be more opportunities to help her. Irene smiled awkwardly and said that she was of course pleased, but it wasn't because of her that he wanted this title. He always said she was everything to him, and considering everything she had done for him, this was the least he could do to repay her. As soon as they went out into the hall to meet the guests, Alan was noticed by his fencing buddy. Irene immediately recognized Sir Bowen, Lady Helen's younger brother and Alan's training mate. The guy immediately rushed towards them, noticing how dazzling Lady Turlin was today. Alan said that he could have gone straight to the hall, so why did he come, and told him not to be nice to his sister. Why, the boy asked, explaining that he wanted to go to the main hall with his dear friends. Irene noticed that he had arrived without his sister and asked if he was waiting in the hall. As he embraced his friend, he said that Lady Helen had arrived earlier and must now be in Rivet Hall. Rivet Hall asked Irene in surprise, informing her that the celebration would be at Belmont Hall. "What?" Bowen asked, not understanding. Their invitations clearly stated that the reception would take place in Rivet Hall. "Damn," Alan swore, realizing his mistake. It seems he got the venue wrong on the invitation. Irene asked her brother who he had sent them to, and Alan replied, to some familiar houses. It's good that the halls are nearby if they meet the guests in person. Everything can be fixed. And as soon as they got down, Irene saw people who had gathered because of a mistake in the invitation. However, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone was whispering about something, and Irene asked if something had happened. Alan immediately asked those present loudly what was going on here. The people greeted Mr. Casaros and explained that when they arrived, the door to the hall was closed. So they decided that they were mistaken. But suddenly they heard a noise inside, and when they finally opened the door, they saw. Sir Servan and Lady Bowen, who were enjoying a secret rendezvous, were shocked by this news. But what were they doing here? David immediately rushed to his sister with concern, asking if this was true. He asked if she had intentionally remained alone with Sir Servan. "She's with Monsieur Pierre," Helen said, looking at the boy. But then Pierre turned away in fear. Helen, hurt by the betrayal, trembled with fear and, crying, threw herself into her brother's arms. People behind their backs were discussing that in such a case, the families had no choice but to get them engaged. Otherwise, the scandal would tarnish their good name. Irene thought anxiously that she must call the Duchess immediately to settle the situation. And she called out to Alan worriedly, but shuddered when she saw the expression on his face. Alan, but why is he smiling? Irene thought. In such a situation, anyone would be confused, or at least show concern, especially since Helen is the sister of his close friend. But then the Duchess arrived, and having found out what had happened, like a conductor, took the situation into her own hands. The guests were carefully escorted to the required room, and Helen and Pierre left the evening under an elegant pretext. And the Duchess took Alan away with her so that he could explain himself, and the expression on her face was colder than usual. And then they called her too. Irene tried to understand from the Duchess's expression what he had said to his mother and why she was still silent. But then, gathering his strength, he suddenly concentrated and told his daughter to stay away from Alan. Summer explained that this child would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. His mother, Natalie, was exactly the same at the mention of Alan's mother's name. Irene shuddered. This expression on his face, the Duchess recalled with pain, he deliberately mixed up the halls in the invitations. And even after what he did, he does not feel a drop of remorse, not believing Irene said that she was wrong. The girl believed and convinced herself that he was not at all like Natalie and was trying to become a worthy heir. But Leto, unable to restrain herself, shouted and ordered Irene to do as she was told, and she worriedly admitted that she was saying this for her own good. After this, Irene left the Duchess's office. When Alan, who was waiting for her, called out to his sister, Irene asked her brother if he had been waiting for her here all this time. Alan confirmed this. He knew she would be shocked and couldn't leave her alone after that. Hugging his sister, he said, "This servant, I couldn't even imagine that he was so low, that he dares to show sympathy towards her." And he himself secretly meets with another woman, and also with her close friend, Lady Bowen. Here, Irene, shuddering, asked Alan if he really knew about their relationship, and did it on purpose. Her voice trembled, and she deliberately listed the wrong hall on the invitations to make them look bad. "Of course not," the young man answered very calmly, and asked if the Duchess had told her this. Irene cringed, remembering her mother's words. He really doesn't even show a drop of remorse now. She had never seen him like this before. Irene exclaimed indignantly, telling him not to pretend, and asked why he did it. But then Alan began to assure his sister that it was just a coincidence and that the Duchess was overreacting. And he asked whether he, the heir of the Duke, would deliberately undermine trust in himself. Irene went cold with fear and froze. Alan did all this because of her, Irene, because she did not reject the advances of the son of the Servan family. That is why he decided to take extreme measures and eliminate his rival, the Duchess told her then. But the girl didn't understand why he had to do all this. But Summer continued. She could no longer close her eyes and asked her daughter to remember one thing. His gaze was always directed only at her, and it was now that the girl was convinced of this. Alan asked if he would really do such a thing, unless it was for her safety. Realizing this, Irene wondered in horror if the Duchess was right. Suddenly the guy noticed that she was shaking all over and, holding his sister's hand, asked if she was cold. And he suggested going inside, and he took her inside and, after hesitating, slyly asked her to simply trust him. Irene looked at him with alarm and wondered if Alan was really obsessed with her. A few days later, Lita asked the lady if she was still unwell, saying that dinner would be served soon. Irene awkwardly asked to tell everyone that today she would again dine in her room. After what happened at the ball before the tournament, she felt very awkward being around Alan. She wondered if the Duchess's words were true. How could she now stay close to him? She never dared to imagine that she could end up in a situation where he, obsessed with her, would lead her to a bad ending. The palace just sent out invitations to this year's debut ball, and while she is busy preparing, she will be able to keep her distance. Perhaps over time, his interest in her will subside. While she was thinking, she didn't even notice how quickly time flew by, and now she and Alan were already heading to the capital, to that very ball. The Duchess said that she should have accompanied them, but Irene understood everything. She was not well. She would get to the capital on her own, so she asked him not to worry. Then Leto asked if she was still keeping her distance from him. Sighing, Irene confirmed this. She even specially scheduled her departure to the capital for the next day. The journey to the capital was supposed to take several days, and asking her daughter to take care of herself, she sent her on her way. However, on the way, Irene felt somehow ill. She did not understand what was wrong with her. She could not even breathe. It felt like the carriage was about to tip over, but then she suddenly remembered how Irene died in the original story. There were no details, of course, but everyone suspected that Alan, hating her, had arranged this assassination attempt. But what if he had nothing to do with it? What if today is the very day when, according to the plot, she is supposed to die? From lack of oxygen and fear, Irene shrank and began to visibly tremble. She wanted at least someone to help her. And of course her maid, seeing her mistress's condition, jumped up to her. She worriedly asked her what had happened to her and asked her to calm down and breathe. It was becoming more and more difficult for Irene with each passing second, but suddenly she heard the cherished words asking her to stop the carriage. Surprisingly, they were spoken by Alan, the man she had been avoiding for a long time. He took the girl out of the carriage and, having calmed her down, asked if she was feeling better. Yes, Irene answered, calm and relieved, thanking Alan. Perhaps it would be worth stopping in the nearest town, the guy asked. There she could regain her strength. But the girl refused, saying that she was already fine, but asked him to tell her how he ended up here. Alan could not let her go to the capital alone, prepared everything necessary, sent her things by carriage, and caught up with her on horseback. And then Alan asked plaintively if she really hated him that much. Since that night she had been avoiding him, and she was worried that he had done something wrong today too. He asked the girl to say, and then he would immediately return to the estate. Irene pursed her lips. His trembling, pleading voice seemed to take her back to that stormy day when he was only 14. Then she promised that she would always be on his side. Irene removed her hand from Alan's, and grabbing Alan by the face, she asked him to raise his head and asked if she could hate him. The guy was surprised by her words but still felt pleased. And so the brother and sister, as a sign of reconciliation, tenderly touched their foreheads like cats. Irene admitted that she just wants him to become a worthy duke, whom everyone will admire. If she wanted it, then Alan would certainly become it, though Irene happily asked if he promised. And the young man swore this, saying that her desires were law for him. As night fell, Lita called out to her mistress and told her that they had found a hotel. During the journey, Irene thought about a lot if fate really connected her with Alan. It is her duty to make him a good character, as he was in the original story. Oddly enough, the feelings of anxiety that had been tormenting her until now suddenly disappeared into thin air. 3 days later, they finally reached the capital. Having settled into the city residence of the ducal house, they immediately went to visit Marquis Stefan. The butler welcomed Mr. Casaros and Mrs. Turlon to the residence of House Stefan. They were waiting for them, Marquis Stefan, and it is in this residence that the main character of the novel, Hestia Stefan, lives. Following Alan through the corridors of the estate, Irene wondered what kind of person she was. Hestia. The butler asked them to go there, saying that the Marquise would soon come out to them. But suddenly a cry was heard, saying that the girl had not stolen the blue topaz and asking why Mom only believed Hestia. Hestia told her sister that this was not what she meant, but she did not understand what was happening then, and Irene wondered what was happening there. Suddenly, during the altercation, the girl pulled her hand away and her sister, unable to stand, fell on the guests. Alan picked up the girl. Green eyes met gold, and Alan asked if she was hurt. The Marchioness called out to Hestia with concern and asked her dear if she was safe. Could this lovely girl really be the original heroine, Hestia? Irene thought, enchanted. Next, the Duchess introduced her eldest daughter, Vesta, and her youngest, Hestia. Honestly, she said with a sigh, despite the fact that they are twins, their characters are completely different. The youngest is always very modest, but Vesta immediately shouted at her daughter to immediately apologize to the guests. Vesta said with resentment that it was not her fault that the topaz was missing, and she did not push Hestia on purpose. So why should she apologize? And shouting that it was unfair, she ran away. The Duchess apologized that the elder one was behaving worse than the younger one, but Irene asked her not to worry, saying that it was nothing to worry about. Hestia looked at her so intently. She was about 13, 14. She looked even younger than she expected. Has she already charmed Alan? I wonder what he felt when he met her. After all, in the original, they fell in love with each other at first sight, Irene thought. The girl thanked the Duchess for agreeing to accompany her to the debutante ball on behalf of the Duchess. After such a warm letter from her Grace, it goes without saying, replied the Duchess. She would have suggested that they stay for dinner, but as they could see, now was not the best time for that. Alan asked the lady not to worry, saying that they were tired from the journey, and therefore asked to allow them to take their leave. Entering the hall, the guy noticed that they had guests. He was glad to meet them and introduced himself as Jupiter Stefan. Jupiter Stefan, the girl thought. It seemed like he was the heroine's older brother. How fortunate Jupiter, his mother remarked, and asked her son to accompany Sir Casaros and Lady Turlon. Oh, that same Sir Casaros, he had heard of his outstanding skill in fencing. Alan said that he was too kind. At the same time, a girl approached the young men, greeting them and introducing herself as Irene Turlon. However, instead of answering, Jupiter froze in surprise, and then the girl called out to Sir Jupiter, Coming to his senses, the guy gasped and apologized, saying that she was just terribly similar to one of his acquaintances. After the explanation, Irene understood why he was staring so intently and called it a coincidence. And Jupiter said that she had the same beautiful ruby hair. The girl was discouraged by this. But then Alan said that they were just about to leave, and Jupiter asked to let him see them off. Then Hestia also spoke up awkwardly and embarrassedly, asking if she could also accompany the guests. The older brother was amused by his sister's enthusiasm and assumed that their guests had made an impression on her. Already on the street, Jupiter asked Lady Turlin if she could visit his sisters sometimes while she was in the capital. He said she could be a great role model for them and thought they could have some sort of reception. But then Alan asked that before thinking about receptions, wouldn't it be better to first reconcile the sisters? Hestia immediately understood everything and shuddered, tears again appearing in her eyes. Not as a reproach, Alan noted, seeing the baby's condition, and he said that his sister was already a rather busy person. Jupiter, not quite understanding everything, agreed with him. And, hugging his sister around the waist, he said, "If that's the case, then all the best," and went into the carriage. It was stupid to expect anything else. Alan didn't react to Hestia at all, Irene thought, and their relationship with him is already far from what it was in the original, but maybe he will fall in love with her later. Alan asked why she was angry because he might have been too harsh, but Irene was instead glad that he had intervened. Then the guy suggested that she take a walk around the capital tomorrow. It was her first time here, so he could show her all the most interesting things. The girl happily thanked him. There was no point in worrying now. It was better to just enjoy the time spent with Alan. There was a large library in the capital, and Irene wondered if he would agree to go there. Lita said that only in the capital something terrible was happening, and Irene asked what she was talking about. Lita said that yesterday a servant was thrown out of a nobleman's house, accused of stealing jewelry. Irene immediately remembered yesterday's situation in Stefan's house, how Vesta screamed that she had not stolen the blue topaz. And then Lita reported that the maid's hand had been cut off for stealing, and Irene cowered fearfully. Could it be? She thought anxiously, and asked Lita if this servant worked in the house of Marquis Stefan. But unfortunately, Lita didn't know this and asked if she should find out. Irene hoped that it was just a coincidence, or that she was just winding herself up, and still asked to find out. And even when they went out for a walk around the capital, Irene still couldn't let go of the thoughts. However, the Marquis Stefan family is known for its kindness and nobility, and the girl found it hard to believe that they had resorted to such a barbaric punishment. Alan noticed Irene's condition and asked what she was thinking about. Nothing, she answered anxiously. And then I noticed that today he was with a sword, but even though they had security with them, alarming rumors were circulating around the capital. Therefore, the young man will be much calmer. And Irene thought with emotion, when did he manage to become so prudent? Alan asked sheepishly if she was still thinking how cute he was, and Irene sheepishly replied, of course not. And deciding to change the subject, she drew her brother's attention to the pastry shop he was talking about. But shifting her gaze, the girl noticed a familiar figure among the crowd and froze. She called out to Lady Stefan in surprise, and the girl, shuddering and looking around, called out to Lady Turlin. Having greeted her, she shyly greeted Sir Casaros. The red-haired girl asked the little girl why she was here alone, where her guards were, and where her servants were. The girl anxiously grabbed Lady Turlin's hand and cried, begging her to help her. Hestia said that she came here secretly to meet with the dismissed maid and give her something important. This meant that those terrible rumors were true, but asking them point blank was somehow inappropriate. But then Alan asked, and for this she went to the slums alone. Hestia explained that she was in dire need of money. She wanted to pay her one last time. Alan noticed her recklessness and didn't even know what to call her. Whether she was stupid or brave, Hestia held back her tears with a shudder. Irene wisely stopped Alan, and, apologizing to Hestia, she said that they could not secretly lead her to a dangerous area. She noticed that servants had already been sent for her, and asked the girl to return to the estate and consider other options. Obeying, Hestia agreed with Irene and apologized for disturbing her. While seeing the little girl off, she thought that Hestia really was, like in the novel, incredibly kind and ready to take risks for the sake of the maid. And then Irene asked Alan to tell her why he was rude to her. Alan sighed heavily and responded with displeasure because their long-awaited exit was ruined because of her. The girl froze in bewilderment. But in a moment she laughed cheerfully, saying that they could go for a walk with her any other day, and there was nothing to worry about. He said offendedly that she had promised to spend time with him until the carriage arrived. Their security would have been enough to look after her. But Irene couldn't leave the crying girl alone, and that's why Alan felt bad, he admitted. Irene asked what he was talking about, and Alan explained that she was always like that, too sympathetic to others. Then she also ran after him in the snowstorm because she was worried. Irene was horrified. And the young man said with resentment that he didn't like it when she worried about someone other than him. So he still thinks so. Irene was sure that after meeting Hestia, something would change. But why does he still look so lonely and lost, as if he were the same boy from the past? But then Irene called out to Alan and told him that he was special to her, and asked him not to compare himself with others. He behaves like an adult, but sometimes he is capricious like a child. And then Alan froze in embarrassment. "Ah, sister," he suddenly exclaimed. "If she says something like that, he won't be able to hold back," the young man admitted, blushing. Not understanding what Alan was talking about, Irene asked in what sense. "Yes, just like that," the guy replied, waving it off and suggesting that she finally enjoy the time that was left. The girl agreed with her brother, but demanded to explain what he meant. But then a female voice called out to Sir Casaros and Lady Turlin. The maid came running and asked if they had seen young Hestia. Irene asked if she hadn't already gone home in the carriage. But then the woman reported that while they were talking with the coachman, she simply disappeared. Alan reported that she said she got lost on her way to the Orlando area and assumed she was heading there again. "Why?" exclaimed the maid. "Even in broad daylight, the slums are dangerous." "What should I do now?" the girl thought anxiously. The situation was becoming more and more serious. Sighing, Alan said, "Then they will go." Irene agreed as she promised him. "No," the guy told her. They were going to the Orlando area. Irene was surprised. And then the guy explained that until they were sure that Lady Stefan was safe, he would not be able to find peace. "Alan," she said in surprise, and Alan admitted that he expected a more vivid reaction. And then Irene said, "Come on." Together with the guards, the children arrived in the Orlando quarter, a slum. Looking around, Mr. Casaros said that they should look for the girl in the depths of the block. The sister carefully reminded them that it would soon get dark. It was extremely dangerous, and they would be better off waiting for the Marquise's servants. But suddenly they heard someone's deafening child's cry and looked around. And then they realized that Lady Hestia was standing deep in the street. Taking up his sword, Alan ordered his sister to wait here with the guards, and he himself headed forward. Irene rushed after her brother, but the guard stopped her and asked the lady to hide behind him. It was too dangerous. "But Alan is in danger and not her," the girl exclaimed. "What is he worth? We need to help him." But then the man awkwardly replied to the lady that she need not worry about Mr. Casaros. He explained that Mr. Casaros's strength was already comparable to that of an experienced knight from the Duke's order. Irene, who had been worried until then, calmed down and asked in surprise how this was possible. Having finished with the men, Alan noted with displeasure that it was surprising how many reckless actions she had already committed during the day. Hestia apologized and said that her maid Sarah said that she urgently needed money before today. "But coming here alone is extremely dangerous," Irene said worriedly. "But Sarah has no money," Hestia answered, crying. Irene thought about it. She didn't understand why she would risk her life for the sake of a simple servant, and she told the girl that if she insisted, they could help her with the search. "True?" Hestia asked with hope, and Irene suggested looking for her together until the rest of the servants arrived. She asked if she knew where Sarah lived, but Hestia only knew that she lived in that area. Irene asked to describe her appearance, and Hestia thoughtfully said, "Black hair, although it seems to be chestnut." All three realized that with such a description they would not go far. Then Irene asked what color her eyes were. "Black or blue?" she asked awkwardly. Sighing, Alan gloomily explained that black and blue were absolutely opposite colors. She went to such a dangerous place to give the money, but she doesn't even remember what the one she's so worried about looks like. Eventually, after a long search throughout the entire neighborhood, they found the house of the so-called Sarah, but it turned out that she had run away with her family the previous night. Hestia was taken away by the Marquise's guards, and she and Alan returned to the residence with mixed feelings. It was a strange day, but suddenly she noticed the letters she brought to Lita. Among them were invitations from the capital's aristocrats, probably. Even here she would not have peace. But suddenly she came across a letter for Alan. Could it have ended up among hers by mistake? He was so upset that the whole day was spent looking for this maid, and I decided to take the letter to him, and at the same time chat. Irene knocked on the door and asked Alan if she could come in for a minute. The guy asked his sister to wait a minute. It's good that he wasn't asleep yet, Irene thought, and said that they brought her his letter by mistake. But suddenly she froze, blushing at the sight of her brother opening the door for her. Alan, who had just come out of the baths, only had time to throw a towel over his hips. Irene froze in shock, looking at the young man and stopping her gaze on his face. Embarrassed, she turned away abruptly and apologized, saying that she would come back later, but suddenly Alan grabbed her hand. She came to talk about something and asked his sister to give him a second to put on his robe. So, having dressed, Alan asked, the letter addressed to him was in her room. Yes, the girl said, laughing, but the sender is not indicated. Irene's heart was still beating wildly. They had been together since childhood, but this was the first time she had seen him like this. However, after reading the letter, Alan involuntarily grinned and squeezed the sheet of paper in irritation. The girl was surprised and asked if anyone had written to her friends. You could say that, Alan said, waving his hand. He'll visit him soon. That's how it is. Irene was surprised. Winking, Ala asked his sister if she was interested in who it was. Of course, Irene answered. She was curious, but he doesn't have to talk if he doesn't want to. Maybe not to say, her brother asked her coldly. He has a right to privacy too, but if it's good news, she should congratulate him. Congratulations were not what he expected from her, and then Irene innocently asked, what then, support? Alan exhaled loudly and took a step, hanging over his sister. And with a coldness in his voice he said that she knew perfectly well what answer he wanted to hear and ordered her not to pretend. What? Irene asked anxiously. Alan pulled back and grinned and asked, she was exhausted today, wasn't she? So he told her to go, reminding her that tomorrow the preparations for her debut ball would begin, and showing her the door, he wished her good night. Irene stood outside the door for some time with some kind of residue and an unpleasant, oppressive feeling. Several days passed and the debutante ball finally took place in the palace. At the ball, everyone got to know Sir Casaros and also asked how his lordship was doing. Looking at her brother, Irene thought that ever since she gave him that letter, Alan seemed to have become distant. He would disappear for the whole day, then return late at night, smelling of wine and tobacco. Then she excitedly asked Alan where he had been, and the guy replied that he was just going out to get some fresh air. Maybe she should have asked who the letter was from. She felt so lonely when he acted coldly. She thought he was dating some lady, when suddenly the lady called out and asked if she would do him the honor of giving him her first dance. And Irene was already agreeing when suddenly Alan, apologizing, caught his sister and said that he had already invited her first. When the guy left empty-handed, Irene wondered how long he had been standing there and watching. Turning her towards him for the dance, Alan apologized, saying that he said it involuntarily. But everything was fine. Irene was already nervous, and his appearance calmed her down. If a worthy candidate for a husband appears, he will tactfully withdraw, he reported, and asked not to worry. Then Irene, shuddering, asked in amazement why he was saying that. Sorry, I kept trying to pronounce Alan clearly, but he kept stumbling. He didn't want to offend her. Irene grabbed Alan tensely by the shoulders and suggested that they step outside for a moment. Already on the street, she asked, he hasn't been sleeping much lately, so what's going on? It was because of that letter, right? She asked, and Alan cringed. From whom? She asked directly. The one who wanted to see him. Alan answered nervously. Most likely his mother, Natalie. Natalie? Irene asked worriedly. Alan had been disappearing all this time to check this information. Irene asked worriedly why he was silent and asked when they were meeting. Today. He answered. Irene gasped in surprise. But suddenly the scent of musky roses filled the air, and Alan, smelling it, immediately jumped up from the bench. He exclaimed that she was somewhere nearby, and Irene, looking around, asked, Here. The brother said that he would go and look around and told his sister to stay here. Alan immediately ran away, not listening to Irene. She wanted to go with him, but suddenly she shuddered because of the noise in the bushes nearby, and soon she heard screams. One girl screamed that he was simply unbearable. Another asked Vesta not to be so angry. Irene clearly recognized Vesta's voice, and meanwhile Hestia, who had been hit, was crying and saying that they were twins. Yeah, Vesta was indignant, and her twin sister set her up, accusing her of stealing that damn topaz. Coming out of the bushes, Irene wondered what they were doing here. And Vesta kept shouting at her sister and didn't even dream that she would ever forgive her, because she had deliberately made her out to be a thief. It's good that it later turned out that this was Sarah's doing, but she did everything to protect her and put her sister in a bad light. Hestia said she had no choice and wanted to pretend that the stone was simply lost, but her mother did not believe her. She exclaimed to Vesta, she knew what a difficult situation Sarah was in. So Hestia knew Sarah was to blame, Irene thought tensely. But she didn't understand how it was possible to set up her own sister to protect the mustard one. And after Vesta angrily screamed at her sister, then why didn't she just tell the truth? When Irene said that she herself gave her the topaz and no one stole anything, she exclaimed in shock, "What are you talking about?" Naturally, the sisters heard her and turned around in fear. So Hestia herself gave the topaz to her sister, but then the maid suffered innocently. Vesta couldn't bear the shame of being caught like that, and then she ran away, leaving her sister behind. Hestia couldn't stand it either, and Irene asked the lady if she was okay. But Hestia, continuing to cry, asked why everything turned out this way. She wanted the best. Irene wondered, with a hint of disgust, if she really didn't understand what she had done wrong. She said that she would find Vesta, and told Hestia to go and treat the wound on her cheek. But where could Vesta have gone? I wish Alan was here now, but now he came face to face with Natalie. She, of course, was worried whether her brother would be able to cope with her, but suddenly she froze when she saw the open gate. These were service gates, but why were they open and where was the security? The girl thought anxiously. But suddenly she heard Vesta screaming to be let go. And finding her with my gaze, I thought with alarm, this can't be, these are kidnappers? Worriedly, Irene thought that she needed to quickly return to the palace and call the guards. But suddenly she crashed into someone and screamed in fear. The man grinned. And laughing, he told his comrades that there was another one there. Irene froze in fear. Meanwhile, Alan, continuing to search for his mother, told her to come out already. "It's been a long time since we've seen each other. He's grown so much, her boy," Natalie said, and asked how he knew she was here. "Her stupid perfume can be smelled a mile away," Alan said discontentedly. Natalie gasped and said with a smile that all men are crazy about him. "Will he not hug his own mother after so many years of separation?" the woman asked. "She's not even a noblewoman," Alan reminded reproachfully, and asked how she managed to get here. Natalie had reliable friends, as she put it. "Friends?" the son asked again. "Let's say. But what does she want from him?" The mother said that a war with the northern lands will soon begin. The woman asked if he knew about it, and then Alan asked why it mattered to her. "Oh," the woman said, smiling and informing her darling that this directly concerns him. "After all, the Duke will go to the front and who knows if he will return alive?" she asked cunningly. "In war, anything can happen, really." Alan, anticipating all sorts of things from his mother, asked in horror why she had come to visit him. And the goal was to gently remind him that if something happened to the Duke, the entire house and title would become his. He must prepare to become a full-fledged heir to the House of Casaros, and was ordered to make sure that the Duchess would not interfere. What is all this for? For revenge, of course. The ducal house used and threw her away, and now she will take everything from them. After a pause, the son said with disappointment that she was using him in exactly the same way. What? I'm sorry," Natalie asked mockingly. Alan told her to listen carefully and said that he would become a duke, but not for her revenge. So she can keep her wet fantasies to herself? Natalie is angry at the freak. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a knight calling Sir Casaros. The guard ran closer to the young man and asked if he was Sir Casaros. It was him, and Alan asked what was wrong. The guard said that Lady Turlin, who accompanied him, went outside the palace in search of the Marquise's daughter. "Did something happen to my sister?" the boy asked uncertainly and fearfully. There are no exact witnesses, but according to eyewitnesses, both ladies were kidnapped by suspicious individuals. "Now the palace guards and the city guards are pursuing where?" Alan asked sternly. And when he asked again, he shouted and said that he was asking where they were kidnapped, ordering him to answer immediately. "The northern gate not far from them," he reported worriedly, and Alan ordered that he be taken there immediately. He walked forward and Alan ran after him and told Natalie that they had not finished their conversation yet. Natalie wondered why there was such a fuss around some adopted daughter of the Duchess. But looking at the expression on her son's face, she seemed to understand. Irene Turlon, so that was his weakness. Having brought the girls to themselves, the kidnappers began to curse, asking if they were completely brainless. What should they do with these noble women now? They had agreed to take some wealthy commoner hostage and demand a ransom. Irene asked the men to listen. The jewelry stolen from them would be enough to buy more than one house. She asked them to let them go and they wouldn't tell anyone, hoping that at least this would work. "Their families won't come after them," the kidnapper chuckled. And hovering over Irene, he irritably asked if she thought he would believe this nonsense. Vesta anxiously swore that they would not tell anyone about them, not a word. And the man said that they were not so stupid as to believe the chatter of some girls. The girls turned cold with horror. All these words were useless. They would not let them go. Afterwards, the man told his troglodytes that they would go with him. He had a bazaar with him, and he ordered the rich fools to sit quietly, and the bandits left with these owls. Vesta desperately asked Lady Turlin to forgive her, saying that it was her fault. Irene suggested that the girl leave it for later. At first, the main thing was to figure out how to get out of here. Having broken a plate with her heel, she asked Lady Vesta to try to cut the rope with a shard. Vesta immediately obediently approached and, saying that it was dangerous, asked the lady not to move. The girl was shaking with anxiety, and besides, she couldn't do it. Irene was rushing her, they had little time. But in her haste, Vesta accidentally cut Irene's wrist, and the girl worriedly asked for forgiveness, asking if she was okay. Crying in pain, Irene said that she would live and asked Vesta to just continue. But if they realize what they are trying to do, they might just get killed. If she dies here, how will they all react? Lita will probably cry. And Alan. She had imagined the fate of the villain of this novel so many times, but when she came face to face with death, she is overcome with incredible fear. Alan. Why is it that at such a moment only his face is before her eyes? How strange, as if she, no, it's too early to give up. They would get out and return to the duchy, to Alan and everyone else, she convinced herself, and asked Lady Vesta to push. Having untied the girl's hands, they carefully climbed out through the window. After Irene came down, Vesta held her and asked worriedly if everything was okay. The bandits were now on the opposite side of the building. They had a chance to escape, and grabbing the younger one by the hand, she dragged her away, thinking that she needed to make her way to the palace. But suddenly the bandits noticed them. At that moment, Irene squeezed Lady Vesta's hand and told her to run. They immediately ran away from the bandits without looking back. It was impossible for them to be caught. But suddenly Irene saw salvation before her. A squad of knights was running straight towards them to meet them, but even out of all the many men, she saw only one. "Sister!" Noticing Irene, Alan cried out in relief. "Alan!" she screamed. Letting go of Vesta's hand and falling out of her shoes, she rushed towards him. Having run around all the knights, she reached her goal and threw herself into her brother's arms. "Thank the gods," Alan said, holding Irene close to him with trepidation. He thought they would never see each other again. The moment she saw this guy in front of her, she was overcome with incredible relief, and she finally realized that she loved Alan. Waking up in the morning, Irene wondered where she was. But suddenly she felt a touch, and turning her head, she remembered that Alan had saved her yesterday. Just as the kidnappers were about to overtake them, the guards arrived and seized them, and Lady Vesta was taken away under protection. It seems that after this, she lost consciousness right in his arms. Irene had a vague memory of him holding her all the way in the carriage, and his voice softly whispering consolation. "Everything is fine? Everything is fine now," he says, pressing Irene's head tightly to his chest, as if afraid of losing her and this trembling in his hands. It turns out, but again he helps her out. Touching Irene touched his cheek, and then Alan woke up. He immediately jumped up and excitedly exclaimed, "Sister, you've finally woken up," asked if she was in pain and whether he should bring her anything. "Everything is fine," Irene answered calmly, asking, she must have scared him a lot, and how, he said, she could have died. Irene got out of bed and apologized worriedly, but suddenly felt a sharp pain in her wrist. Both his arms and legs were all scratched, Alan muttered, but Irene called it all trifles, just small cuts. "It's nothing," Alan asked indignantly and objected, but she was bleeding, and asked if she could even imagine what he had been through. "It would have been better if he had finished off all these creatures on the spot," Alan said, seething. But then the sister called out to her brother and asked him not to make such a terrible grimace. Alan apologized. He didn't mean to say that in front of her. "No problem," Irene replied. That meant he was scared too. She was also afraid. She thought that she would never see him again. Alan was embarrassed and asked Irene not to take such risks again. The girl agreed and said that she wouldn't do it again, and at Alan's request, she promised this. Alan coughed and, assuming that she was hungry, offered to bring food and asked her to wait a little. But then Irene called out to Alan and asked if he had met Natalie, his mother, yesterday. Alan hesitated a little, thinking about his answer. And he forced a smile and said no, it wasn't her who sent the letter. He lied that everything was fine. "True?" Irene asked hopefully, watching that expression on her face. Alan said that it was a ridiculous joke and asked not to bother his head with it. Later, she would regret this day. If she had insisted on talking then, perhaps all this could have been avoided. And a few days later, Lady Vesta visited her with a conversation about the sisterly conversation she had overheard that day. Hestia had always been too kind-hearted, and she probably gave the topaz to the maid this time too, after learning about her difficulties. She handed over the jewel, calling it a very precious thing. If sold, it would be enough to cover all the debts. Sarah told her mistress that she could not accept such a thing, but she convinced her that her mother had given it to her, and she was free to do with it as she wished. Despite Sarah's refusal, Hestia happily said that everything was fine and asked to take it. Hestia firmly believed that she had the right to do with her things as she wanted, but when the topaz disappeared, there was a commotion in the house. The servants said that they looked for the stone everywhere, but it was nowhere to be found, so the Marquise asked who stole it. Who dared? Mother turned to Hestia and asked who was the last one to take her box. And frightened by her mother's anger, she looked back at Vesta. The Marquise asked, "Vesta, is it really her?" The girl said of course not, and asked her sister why she looked at her. And it has always been like this. Hestia does not know how to take responsibility for her actions, Vesta admitted. She was sickened by the girl's behavior, but still, she was her sister, and so she asked the lady to keep it a secret. Irene understood everything perfectly well and asked Vesta not to worry about it. The main character turned out to have such a dark side. The more she got to know Hestia, the less she understood her. But one thing was clear to her: the girl did not want Alan to be near her. Irene approached her brother, and Alan happily asked his sister if the guest had already left. "Yes," she answered, and Alan said that the wounds on her back had not yet healed, and that she shouldn't walk so much. Therefore, sitting on one knee, he said that if his legs hurt, he could carry her on his back. Irene was embarrassed, but she could no longer ignore his feelings, so climbing on his back, she said, "Then please." Alan admitted that he had already thought that she would refuse out of politeness and asked what was wrong with her today. Irene told Alan that when they returned to the duchy, she would need to tell him something. "So what?" her brother asked then, but Irene answered intriguingly, "Everything has its time." "She is cruel, sister," Alan answered, and Irene thought about what kind of face she would see on Alan at the moment of her confession.